Colonel Rebecca Morrison commanded Edwards Air Force Base with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the weight of a military dynasty behind her. At 34, she was the youngest wing commander in Air Force history, an achievement secured through legacy connections and preserved through meticulous control and uncompromising authority. Beyond the base's perimeter, the California desert sprawled wide and indifferent, but Rebecca's world remained perfectly ordered inside her climate command center. Digital displays tracked billion-dollar aircraft as she moved through the corridors in a crisp uniform, her boots echoing against polished floors. "Colonel Morrison, the quarterly evaluations are ready," announced Captain Sarah Williams, her aide and fellow Academy graduate. "There's some discussion about Captain Jackson's performance metrics." Rebecca's lips curled into a familiar mask of command. "Captain Marcus Jackson, I've been monitoring his progress. Some pilots lack the instinctual judgment required for advanced operations." The briefing continued with military precision. When Captain Jackson, a 29-year-old Detroit-born fighter pilot, proposed modifications to the training curriculum, Rebecca cut in before he finished. "Captain Jackson, our methodologies have been refined through generations of combat operations. We don't compromise effectiveness for untested ideas lacking verified results." Silence followed. Marcus remained composed, but Rebecca noticed a flash of frustration in his eyes before it was quickly hidden behind professional decorum. "Yes, ma'am. I was only suggesting that introducing diverse tactical perspectives could improve overall combat readiness." Her smile never faltered. "Perhaps focus on mastering established procedures before offering alternatives to strategies that have protected American airspace for decades." Later, in her office overlooking the flight line, Rebecca watched the F-22 Raptors taxi like mechanical hawks. Her promotion to full colonel was imminent. Her evaluations were flawless. All was as it should be. Williams entered with the usual formality. "Colonel, your father called about the weekend gala. The Patterson family requested you be seated with Lieutenant Colonel David." "Excellent. The Pattersons understand proper military tradition." Rebecca felt reassured. People like Marcus were temporary anomalies to be managed, not understood. In her ordered worldview, her behavior wasn't prejudice. It was quality control, maintaining standards, protecting excellence. Rebecca's identity had been forged across generations of service. Her great-grandfather had flown in World War II. The Morrison family home in Colorado Springs was a shrine to military superiority. Squadron patches, valor medals, framed photos with presidents. Each family gathering reinforced a simple truth: leadership came from breeding, tradition, and rank. "Rebecca, General Patterson had high praise for your leadership," said her mother, retired Colonel Patricia Morrison, arranging miniature flags in glass vases, though he did express concerns about the development of certain newer personnel. Her father, retired Brigadier General William Morrison, added with quiet gravitas, "Fighter aviation demands absolute excellence. Different backgrounds often bring different attitudes toward precision. That doesn't always align with what's needed in combat." "Exactly, father. Marcus often proposes unproven approaches. I've been guiding him, showing where the boundaries lie." Her brother, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Morrison, nodded thoughtfully. "Pilots from non-traditional backgrounds sometimes need more structure to adapt to the culture." The conversation slipped easily into familiar rhythms, maintaining standards, preserving legacies, ensuring distinguished service records. Lieutenant Colonel David Patterson arrived for cocktails, his presence further reinforcing Rebecca's worldview. "Rebecca," he said warmly, "I hear excellent things about your leadership upholding standards while navigating today's diversity expectations." It was praise wrapped in code. She understood and accepted it with poise. These weren't prejudices, she assured herself. These were practical, strategic decisions made in the name of readiness. Later that night, surrounded by those who shared her values, Rebecca felt affirmed. Her approach wasn't just correct, it was necessary. Still, in the quiet corners of her mind, small, persistent whispers tried to surface. Whispers of potential she hadn't nurtured, of talent she'd dismissed, questions she wasn't ready to face. But those thoughts were easily silenced by approval, tradition, and the certainty that her methods were working. Monday morning returned. Her, to her element. Sterile hallways, the scent of jet fuel, the rhythmic hum of aircraft. She arrived early to review Marcus Jackson's reports in preparation for the weekly evaluation, meeting another chance to reinforce command while appearing objective. Marcus had submitted a sophisticated analysis of air-to-air combat scenarios. His recommendations were tactically advanced, strategically sound, surprisingly innovative. "Thank you, Captain Jackson," Rebecca said after he finished, her tone carrying the polished edge of condescension. "Your enthusiasm is noted, though. Some mission planners might find your approach overly theoretical for practical combat conditions." The word theoretical landed like a guided missile. Everyone in the room caught its intent. Marcus's jaw tightened barely, but he stayed within the bounds of protocol. "Ma'am, these scenarios are based on current overseas engagements. The data suggests significant gains in tactical flexibility." Rebecca's smile remained cool. "I appreciate your input, Captain." Rebecca leaned back, her tone cool and polished. "Your academic perspective is appreciated, Captain, but real-world air superiority requires a more traditional grasp of aerial warfare. Perhaps observe Captain Williams' approach to mission planning. She has excellent combat instincts." The implication was unmistakable. Williams, properly credentialed and culturally aligned, intuitively grasped the nuances of air combat in a way Marcus, despite his superior analysis and innovation, ever would. Other pilots shifted uncomfortably. They recognized the exchange for what it was: humiliation dressed as mentorship. After the meeting, Rebecca intercepted Marcus near the flight simulator complex, where the next morning's sorties were being prepared. The timing was calculated, an audience of peers and subordinates, the perfect backdrop for a lesson. Her tone was friendly. The execution, surgical. "Captain Jackson, I wanted to follow up on your presentation. You clearly put significant effort into your tactical analysis. That shows real dedication to mission success." Marcus nodded, eyes hopeful. She paused just long enough to let the compliment register, then delivered the blow. "However, I'm concerned your communication style may not fully align with squadron culture. Additional protocol training on briefing delivery might be helpful." Marcus straightened slightly. "Ma'am, could you clarify which aspects of my briefing style were concerning?" Rebecca laughed, a perfectly measured sound, polite, light, and sharp as a blade. "Oh, nothing specific you've done wrong. But mission commanders tend to prefer tactical briefings delivered in more familiar formats. They're comfortable with certain styles of air combat planning." The damage was surgical, undermining his instincts, labeling his authenticity as inappropriate, and reinforcing the idea that commander comfort mattered more than tactical excellence. The subtext was clear. No matter how talented he was, Marcus would always be an outsider in her elite, insular world. Throughout the morning, Rebecca continued her silent campaign. She reassigned his most promising tactical research to more trusted, senior pilots. She excluded him from classified briefings where his expertise was most relevant. She directed him toward routine training missions assignments, designed to sideline rather than showcase. At lunch, when Lieutenant Colonel David Patterson joined her in the officers' club, Rebecca ensured their conversation happened within earshot. "David, you should see the analysis some of our newer pilots are producing," she said, voice raised just enough. "Of course, we have to balance innovation with what mission commanders expect: proven methodologies, grounded approaches." David nodded, with practiced agreement. That's exactly why Edwards maintained such exceptional readiness. Commanders know you understand their needs and develop pilots accordingly. That afternoon, the cycle reached its peak. A high-stakes monthly briefing to visiting Pentagon officials was scheduled, an opportunity for Rebecca to showcase the base's tactical leadership. Marcus's research had contributed significantly to the evaluations being presented, but Rebecca made no mention of him. "Captain Williams and I are proud to present our readiness assessment," she announced, facing the row of uniformed brass. "We've focused on maintaining conservative tactical approaches, the very ones that have kept American fighters dominant for decades." From the back of the room, Marcus watched his own work appear in slide after slide, rephrased, repackaged, and credited to others. Rebecca occasionally glanced in his direction, ensuring he understood his place in the hierarchy she had so carefully constructed. The Pentagon officials responded with praise, outstanding emphasis on traditional excellence. One general remarked, "and very measured on innovation. That kind of risk management is rare these days." Rebecca absorbed the validation like oxygen. To her, this was leadership: clear signals, enforced standards, performance delivered with precision. What Marcus experienced as exclusion, she considered professional development. If his confidence was eroding, it only meant he still didn't understand how advancement really worked. But Marcus, silently gathering his materials, saw everything with painful clarity. Every reassignment, every omission, every condescending smile was deliberate. He knew now that the campaign wasn't personal weakness on his part, it was a carefully calibrated system. Yet in the quiet, he still held something Rebecca hadn't accounted for: dignity, intelligence, and a quiet resolve. Qualities that would soon force her to question everything she believed about merit, command, and what it truly meant to serve. Then, at 13:47 hours, the calm at Edwards Air Force Base shattered. The emergency klaxon screamed through the desert. Heat, personnel scattered, scrambling toward readiness positions. Inside the command center, lights turned red and phones erupted with urgent tones. Rebecca was reviewing evaluations when the secure line rang. "Colonel Morrison." Major Roberts reported from the control tower, voice tight with urgency. "We have a code red. Thunderbird 7 has suffered complete hydraulic failure at 30,000 feet. There's a civilian observation team on board." Rebecca froze. Thunderbird 7, the Air Force's most advanced stealth prototype, was in crisis. On board were Pentagon officials, senators, and defense contractors. The aircraft was essential to securing funding for the next generation of air superiority systems. "What's the pilot's status?" she demanded, already moving toward the emergency command center. "Captain Jackson is at the controls. He's maintaining flight for now, but the aircraft is essentially unflyable. No control surfaces, no flaps, no landing gear. Fuel's at 20 minutes. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. The pilot she had systematically marginalized, whose capabilities she had undermined at every turn, was now the only one standing between national catastrophe and salvation, except cultural cohesion. That note, buried in the margins of one annual performance review, hit Rebecca like a delayed detonation. "Captain Jackson demonstrates excellence in tactical execution and flight operations, but occasionally exhibits challenges integrating into the established squadron culture." She had written that line herself. Rebecca sat back in the worn leather armchair in her father's study, staring at the printed personnel file, as if it might rearrange itself into something easier to reconcile. But there it was, his entire record, laid bare, and not a single black mark where it counted. He hadn't failed the culture. The culture had failed him Wednesday. 6:45 hours. Edwards AFB. Rebecca stood at the hangar entrance, watching the shattered remains of Thunderbird 7 being wheeled into a secure bay for debrief and analysis. Engineers moved with reverence, as if tending to the wreckage of a war hero. Across the flight line, Marcus walked alongside a medical officer, a light bandage around his left arm, his posture straight, despite exhaustion. He was speaking quietly, gesturing toward a group of young crew chiefs who had helped with post-flight inspections. He wasn't grandstanding. He wasn't asking for accolades. He was mentoring. Rebecca approached. "Captain Jackson," she said, voice more even than she felt. He turned, saluted sharply. "Colonel Morrison." "At ease." She hesitated. "I reviewed your post-flight debrief. Your decisions under pressure. They were exceptional." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, eyes steady. No arrogance. No resentment. Just quiet professionalism. She studied his expression, trying to find some trace of the pilot she had dismissed, ignored, pushed aside. But all she saw was integrity and strength that had never needed her approval to exist. "I owe you an apology," she said. That surprised him. He didn't speak right away. "I misjudged you," Rebecca continued, louder now. "Not because of your skills, they were obvious in hindsight. I failed to recognize your character, your excellence. I allowed legacy thinking to cloud my leadership, and that failure could have cost lives." He blinked, just once. "Permission to speak candidly, ma'am. Granted. I always knew I wasn't what you expected in a test pilot. Wrong background? Wrong accent? Didn't come from a family of generals. But I didn't sign up to prove you wrong. I signed up to serve. Yesterday wasn't about validation. It was about responsibility. I had 6 lives in that aircraft. I did what any pilot would be trained to do. I just didn't let the system tell me I wasn't capable." Rebecca nodded. The truth of it landed harder than any reprimand she'd ever received. "Thank you for your service, Captain," she said quietly, as he walked away. She didn't call him back. She didn't try to justify herself further. Some failures can't be excused. They must simply be recognized. Thursday, Pentagon video conference. Colonel Morrison, General Matthews said, his face tight on the secure screen, "Will be recommending Captain Jackson for the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor. His actions have already been incorporated into the next iteration of test pilot training. But I'm particularly interested in your leadership assessment. How someone like Jackson nearly slipped through the cracks." Rebecca took a breath. "General Captain Jackson didn't slip through the cracks. We put the cracks there. Our systems favored familiarity over merit. I contributed to that failure, and I intend to correct it, starting with re-examining how we define excellence, and who gets the opportunity to demonstrate it." There was silence on the other end. Then slowly, Matthews nodded, double quotes good, "Because the next war won't be won by who fits the mold. It'll be won by who can rise beyond it." Weeks later, Edwards' AFBA plaque went up in the simulator training wing. Captain Marcus Jackson, for valor, precision, and rewriting what's possible. Thunderbird 7, emergency descent, June 24th, 30%. Is better than 0. Rebecca paused beneath it one morning, reading the inscription before briefing. New test pilot recruits. She had rewritten the curriculum herself. Case studies now included Thunderbird 7, but more importantly, cultural cohesion was no longer code for conformity. As she stepped into the classroom, Rebecca saw young pilots of every background, some who reminded her of herself, others who reminded her of Marcus. All of them eager, all of them ready. This time, she was ready for them too. Those who required Rebecca's personal recommendation were beginning to weigh on her mind more than ever. Sunday dinner at the Morrison home, usually a proud gathering of Colorado Springs military elite, brought familiar rituals, polished silverware, formal attire, and conversations echoing Air Force tradition. But this time, Rebecca found herself unable to fully engage. When the discussion turned to Pentagon initiatives and pilot development programs, she felt a quiet urgency building. Finally, she interrupted her father's usual commentary on military leadership. "Actually," Rebecca began, steadying her voice, "I witnessed something this week that's reshaped how I view pilot evaluation." She recounted Captain Marcus Jackson's emergency landing, the impossible descent, the precision, the poise. She described his mastery of flight control under catastrophic failure, his refusal to eject, and his unwavering commitment to the lives of those aboard. Her family's expressions shifted from pride to confusion. "Well, naturally," her mother said, brushing it off. "He performed adequately under pressure. That's what's expected of our pilots." Rebecca shook her head. "He didn't just meet expectations. He performed a miracle. He saved lives and protected a prototype that represents years of national defense development. His flying was the most extraordinary I've seen in 2 decades." Her father, brow furrowed, regarded her with concerned detachment. "Rebecca, emergency situations can skew judgment. I'm sure the young man did his duty, but that doesn't change the foundational issues we've discussed in pilot development." Lieutenant Colonel David Patterson leaned in, his tone carefully measured. "Your appreciation for solid flying is understandable, Rebecca. But let's not allow one fortunate outcome to cloud months of leadership evaluation. He's still the same pilot you reviewed before this event." Rebecca surprised even herself with what she said next. "But what if I was wrong?" The table fell into stunned silence. The idea of Morrison admitting a mistake in judgment was foreign, even unthinkable. She felt the weight of their collective disapproval settle over her, like armor too tight to remove. But something inside had shifted permanently, and she knew she couldn't go back. That night, lying awake in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by framed accolades and squadron photographs, Rebecca replayed the last few months with new eyes. She saw Marcus' thoughtful tactical suggestions, which she'd brushed aside, his innovative proposals, credited to others, his dignified professionalism in the face of systematic exclusion. For the first time, Rebecca began seeing her behavior through his perspective, recognizing the calculated dismissals she had disguised as professional standards. The pilot, who had just saved 6 lives and billions of dollars, had been minimized under her command, and she had been the architect of that marginalization. It was a devastating realization. She, Rebecca Morrison, standard-bearer of excellence and proud steward of military legacy, had actively wasted the talents of someone whose capabilities may have surpassed everyone she'd previously promoted. Wednesday morning, Edwards AFB. Rebecca returned to base with a new sense of purpose, not to oversee flight operations, but to better understand the pilot whose extraordinary skill had exposed the limitations of her own leadership. She arrived early, observing Captain Jackson from a quiet distance. He didn't know she was watching. What she saw dismantled even more assumptions. Marcus' interactions with ground crews revealed not just professionalism, but genuine humanity. He knew their names. He asked about their kids. He offered advice, praised good work, and made sure even the most junior mechanic felt respected. He carried himself with the same grace and attentiveness, whether he was talking to a senior officer or a young airman. Later, she overheard him speaking with a visitor, Mrs. Johnson, who appeared to represent a local community program. "I understand the funding challenges for the aviation camp," Marcus said, voice calm and compassionate. "Let me connect you with some of the sponsor organizations I work with. These kids deserve a shot at exploring aerospace careers." Their conversation revealed even more. Marcus was deeply involved in STEM outreach, youth mentorship, and programs that expanded aviation opportunities for underrepresented communities, while Rebecca had spent years measuring pilots by strict operational metrics. Marcus had been building something far larger, legacy of impact, inclusion, and leadership beyond the cockpit. Lieutenant Torres soon approached Marcus with respectful urgency. "Captain Jackson, sir, thank you again for helping me understand that instrument approach sequence. Your explanation made a big difference. I passed my check ride." Marcus smiled. "You earned it, Torres. All I did was point you in the right direction. Sometimes talent just needs the right training support." Rebecca watched in growing awe. pilot she had once written off as unfit for advancement was not only a master aviator, but a leader in the truest sense. One who uplifted others, strengthened communities, and shaped the future of flight without waiting for permission. Marcus' actions, his quiet, consistent excellence, fried a generosity of spirit that starkly contrasted with Rebecca's long-held, zero-sum worldview. In him, success wasn't a conquest. It was a shared commitment to excellence, community, and service. And the more she watched him, the more she realized how incompatible her competitive instincts were with his quiet integrity. That afternoon brought an unexpected development. General Matthews arrived at Edwards Air Force Base, accompanied by a Pentagon evaluation team. Their purpose, a classified assessment for a new black project initiative, known as Operation Silent Thunder. As the team reviewed pilot dossiers and operational data, Rebecca felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The complexity of this evaluation far exceeded anything covered by standard test pilot qualifications. Colonel Morrison, General Matthews, said with controlled urgency, "We need your assessment of pilot candidates for Silent Thunder. This program demands capabilities beyond any test program in recent history." Rebecca stiffened, the professional mask slipping for just a moment. She knew the mission profile: experimental propulsion systems, hypersonic flight stressors, advanced cognitive performance metrics under extreme physiological loads. These weren't areas where her expertise was strongest. After the Pentagon team departed for dinner, Rebecca stood outside Marcus Jackson's office, wrestling with pride and uncertainty. Finally, she knocked and stepped inside. "Captain Jackson, may I speak with you privately?" He looked up from his computer, polite, but clearly surprised. "Of course, Colonel. What do you need?" She closed the conference room door behind them and took a steadying breath. "I need your assessment on the Silent Thunder program. The Pentagon's evaluation parameters involve systems and stressors well beyond my direct experience. Frankly, your emergency landing and test pilot background suggest you have the kind of insight this demands." Marcus studied her expression, trying to determine if this was another test of boundaries or a genuine request. "What specifically are they evaluating, ma'am?" "Experimental propulsion integration, cognitive load during sustained hypersonic flight, physiological adaptation to G-forces that exceed our current aircraft limitations." Rebecca forced herself to continue, even as it bruised her ego. "All areas where your experience and technical depth are, clearly superior." Without hesitation, bitterness, Marcus began, outlining a technical framework, addressing each criterion. His explanation was articulate, precise, and deeply informed. He broke down theoretical concepts and translated them into practical recommendations, with clarity born of both study and experience. These performance metrics and system adaptations should align with what Silent Thunder requires, he concluded. "I can have full technical assessments and pilot readiness protocols ready by tomorrow morning, if that would help." Rebecca looked at him, stunned. "You're willing to do that? After everything?" Marcus nodded calmly. "My job is to advance the mission, Colonel. Serving the nation's air superiority isn't personal. Professional excellence benefits us all." His response left her speechless. His commitment to duty, despite how she'd treated him, wasn't weakness, it was strength. Strength she had failed to recognize for far too long. That evening, Rebecca stayed late, poring over Marcus's analysis. Each page was a revelation. His depth of understanding in experimental aviation systems rivaled that of senior aerospace engineers. His approach was tactically innovative, scientifically grounded, and strategically sound. When base security made their final rounds, they found her still at her desk, surrounded by technical reports and pilot evaluation notes. "Working late again, Colonel?" asked Sergeant Martinez, the night shift supervisor. "Yes, reviewing critical assessments," she said quietly. Captain Jackson's work. I'd guess, the sergeant added with a smile. That young man's got one of the sharpest aviation minds I've seen. Helped my son with his Air Force Academy application just last month. Rebecca looked up, surprised. He did. Oh yes, ma'am. Captain Jackson volunteers with the Academy Prep program. Wrote my boy a strong recommendation letter. He's the reason my son got in. As Martinez continued his rounds, Rebecca remained seated in the dimly lit office, finally seeing Marcus Jackson clearly not as an outsider or exception but as an extraordinary officer whose intelligence, humility, and sense of service far surpassed anything her narrow worldview had once allowed. The man who had saved 6 lives and billions in technology wasn't just a hero, he was the kind of leader the Air Force should have been promoting all along. And Rebecca the gatekeeper had been the one holding him back. The tragedy wasn't just what she'd done to him, it was what she'd denied the entire institution by refusing to recognize his capabilities. For the first time in her career, Rebecca Morrison understood she had encountered someone genuinely superior to herself, not just in skill, but in character. Her months of dismissal didn't expose his flaws. They revealed the limits of her own leadership. The fallout began. Successful Silent Thunder assessment should have marked a triumph for the entire base, but instead, it ignited a quiet firestorm in the Air Force's upper echelons. News of Rebecca's collaboration with Captain Jackson and, more importantly, her public acknowledgement of his superior technical and leadership abilities spread through classified channels with the speed of breaking intel. By Thursday morning, her phone rang with an unmistakable tone of consequence. It was General Morrison, her father. His clipped voice left no doubt. "We need to talk, immediately." Rebecca walked into the family meeting with the tight-chested dread of someone heading into a court-martial. The familiar study of her childhood. Home once a comforting display of family pride. Decorated with medals, commendations, and photos with presidents now, felt more like a tribunal. And she was the accused, standing trial for violating the sacred laws of military hierarchy. Rebecca, her father began from behind the polished mahogany desk that had anchored decades of command. "Your mother and I are deeply concerned about some of your recent leadership choices." His voice carried the unmistakable weight of command, even in retirement. "General Matthews mentioned your unusual deference to Captain Jackson during the Pentagon evaluation." Retired Colonel Patricia Morrison, sitting upright, with perfect posture, offered a look that mixed maternal concern with the careful calculation of a career officer. "Darling, people are talking. Across the Air Force community, even in D.C., they're saying you're treating this pilot as if his opinions carry equal weight to yours." Rebecca didn't hesitate. "In many technical areas they do. In fact, his expertise exceeds mine." Her words fell like a dropped secret, shocking, impossible to take back. The room fell silent as her family exchanged stunned glances, the weight of her admission breaking unspoken rules more than any policy violation could. Her brother Kevin, recently rotated back from the Pentagon, leaned forward in disbelief. "Rebecca, I don't get it. One emergency landing, and now you think this guy is some aviation savant? That's not judgment, it's emotional reaction to a crisis." She shook her head. "It wasn't just one event. He's been demonstrating exceptional capability for months. I was too biased to see it." Her father's brow furrowed, voice calm but firm. "Gratitude is one thing, but letting emotions compromise command clarity, that's dangerous. He performed his duty, nothing more. That doesn't mean he should be elevated beyond his appropriate station." That phrase, station, struck something deep in Rebecca. It clarified everything she'd begun to realize. Her family's comfort rested on keeping rigid hierarchies intact. Marcus Jackson wasn't evaluated on ability, but on where they believed someone like him should fit. What if his appropriate station is squadron command? She asked. What if he's more qualified than many current wing commanders? Her mother offered a polished laugh, as practiced as her military etiquette. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not how this works. Leadership at that level requires institutional understanding, something passed down, not simply performed. Proper background, military heritage." As if summoned by some unspoken alarm, Lieutenant Colonel David Patterson arrived, clearly briefed, and ready to support the family line. His tone, like always, carried the confident cadence of someone used to being taken seriously. "Rebecca, I've heard disturbing things from senior personnel circles. Several general officers are worried about your perspective on pilot development." "My perspective?" she asked. "Your judgment. Specifically, your ability to maintain proper distance from subordinates. Captain Jackson seems to have made quite the impression that leadership requires objectivity. You're becoming too, attached." Dinner stretched on for hours. One by one, family members and longtime military colleagues offered different versions of the same message. Marcus had performed well. Yes, but Rebecca's public recognition of his talent was creating discomfort. Her actions threatened the invisible balance that preserved elite military order. She wasn't just backing a junior officer. She was undermining the architecture of trust that their entire institution was built upon. "Think about the message you're sending," her father warned. 2 other squadron members, 2 general officers. People who rose through traditional pathways, who expect others to do the same. Rebecca felt herself suffocating under the weight of tradition that had shaped every part of her identity. But now, for the first time, she saw how that very tradition could blind leadership to actual excellence. "What if those traditional pathways are the problem?" she asked. "What if they're preventing us from promoting the best people?" Her mother leaned in with the quiet, devastating firmness only a seasoned officer and mother could wield. "Think about your own promotion to full colonel, your track toward general officer. David's been patient with this phase, but even his understanding has limits." Rebecca heard the warning clearly. Abandon this line of thought or risk everything. Late into the night, with brandy in hand, General Patterson, David's father and longtime friend of her parents, delivered the final, pointed blow. The Air Force runs on time-tested principles. When senior officers start deferring to junior ranks based on raw ability, rather than institutional seniority, it creates instability, and instability ruins careers, even promising ones. Driving back through the Mojave darkness, Rebecca gripped the wheel tightly. The air around her felt heavier with every mile. The meeting hadn't been hostile. Her family wasn't out to sabotage her. They truly believed they were protecting her from ruining her career, from falling for a narrative that didn't fit the system they dedicated their lives to uphold. But it was too late. What she had witnessed since the Thunderbird 7 incident couldn't be unseen. The capability, the integrity, the mentorship Marcus had outperformed every metric that truly mattered, and she had dismissed it, minimized it, tried to contain it within outdated assumptions. He hadn't changed, she had, and now she had to face the consequences of that change. Friday morning, Air Force Personnel Review Board. Colonel Rebecca Morrison entered the stark briefing room where 5 senior officers sat behind a long table. Flags and insignia lined the walls, formality clinging to the air like static. "Colonel Morrison," began General Henderson, the board's chairman, his voice devoid of preamble, "we've received reports expressing concern over recent command decisions that suggest a deviation from accepted leadership protocols." Rebecca stood tall. "I understand, sir, and I'm prepared to explain my decisions fully." The conference room, the air inside the Personnel Review Board chamber was heavy, thick with expectation, tradition, and veiled resistance. Rebecca could feel it pressing down on her shoulders. Around her sat general officers whose authority had once felt unquestionable, but now their presence struck her differently. She no longer saw impartial leaders, but guardians of a system, more invested in preserving its comfort than recognizing excellence. The subject was pilot development, protocols and squadron morale, but beneath the official phrasing, it was clear. They were challenging her for publicly elevating a pilot the system had quietly marked as out of place. For the first time, Rebecca understood the cost of integrity in a world designed to reward conformity. She could slide comfortably back into the secure, familiar rhythms of elite command culture, or she could step fully into the discomfort of confronting that culture and everything it had made her blind to. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about the kind of leader she was going to be. The diner she chose a quiet booth in a small diner in Lancaster neutral ground, far from the protocols and power dynamics of the base. New uniforms, new salutes, just two people, finally speaking as equals. Marcus arrived, dressed casually, but his posture composed and assured, still carried the same quiet strength he wore in uniform. He approached with the same polite, measured demeanor he'd always shown her, even after months of being disregarded. Colonel Morrison. He greeted her, sliding into the seat across from her. I have to admit, Mom, I'm curious what this meeting is about. Rebecca had rehearsed this moment over and over, but now, sitting across from him, every scripted apology evaporated beneath the weight of his calm, direct presence. Please, she said softly, call me Rebecca, and, ... You're right to be curious. I owe you an apology. Marcus arched an eyebrow, not unkindly. Apology for what, exactly? His question forced her to say it plainly, to own it all. For months, she said, I treated you with systematic dismissal disguised as professional standards. I took credit for innovations that were yours. I excluded you from opportunities you earned. I downplayed your contributions, even when your expertise clearly surpassed mine. He studied her face carefully, searching for the sincerity beneath her practiced exterior. What changed? He asked quietly. You did, she said. That emergency landing, what you did shattered every assumption I had. You saved 6 lives and preserved billions in military assets, with decision-making and flight control I didn't think was possible. And when I went back to look more closely, I realized, ... The pilot I had dismissed as unremarkable is actually more skilled in experimental systems than most of our test pilots, and more committed to service than most of our senior officers. Marcus didn't respond right away. His gaze sharpened. So this conversation is about guilt. The question cut deeper than she expected. Partly, she admitted, but mostly, it's about recognition. I need you to know, I see you now, really see you, and I'm horrified by how blind I've been. Marcus leaned back slightly, his expression serious now. I appreciate your honesty, Rebecca, but I need you to understand something. What I experienced under your command wasn't just professional oversight. It was marginalization, systemic, daily. Rebecca felt her throat tighten, tears beginning to well in her eyes. I know, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Do you? He asked, not unkindly. Do you really understand what it's like to consistently outperform expectations, just to be seen as barely adequate? To offer ideas that get ignored until someone else repeats them? To watch your accomplishments handed off to others while you're kept on the outside of advancement conversations? No, Rebecca admitted. I can't imagine what that felt like. It felt like being made invisible, Marcus said. Like my military value wasn't measured by skill, but by whether it made others uncomfortable to acknowledge my competence. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the dam broke. For 2 hours, Marcus shared stories and truths Rebecca had never thought to consider. The constant, silent pressure to overperform just to earn basic respect. The isolation of being questioned when others were automatically trusted. The way her dismissal of his talent had signaled to the entire command that he was unworthy without her ever saying a word. "I've been serving in environments like this my entire career," he said, finally, "always having to prove myself over and over to leaders who couldn't or wouldn't see past their assumptions." Rebecca listened, no longer trying to defend herself, just absorbing it, and realizing with every word how much damage she had done not only to Marcus, but to the standards she once claimed to uphold, and how much it was going to cost to make it right. The decision. Rebecca stood alone in the Pentagon conference room, her heart pounding beneath layers of controlled military decorum. The topic on the table was grave: accusations questioning Captain Marcus Jackson's security clearance. But Rebecca saw it for what it truly was: calculated takedown. "General," she said steadily, "this is a fabricated accusation designed to destroy Captain Jackson's career. Both Patterson and Williams have personal and professional motives for removing him." General Henderson narrowed his eyes. "Colonel Morrison, that's a serious allegation. Do you have any evidence to support such claims?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, sir. The evidence is in his record: flawless evaluations, consistent leadership, and most recently, risking his life to save Pentagon officials and secure classified assets. You're choosing to ignore the reality of who he is." But, as she looked around the room, she saw it clearly now. The decision had already been made. This wasn't about justice. It was about self-preservation, about eliminating the discomfort caused by someone who didn't fit their neat hierarchy. "You're talking about ending the career of an exceptional officer," she said, voice rising, "based on accusations from people with conflicts of interest. This is political, not procedural." Henderson's tone turned final. "Captain Jackson's access to classified information is no longer compatible with national security needs. Effective immediately, he is suspended. His clearance revoked pending investigation." Rebecca sat through 4 agonizing hours of justification concerns about operational integrity, intelligence protection, and preserving confidence in leadership. But she knew what it really was: institutional prejudice cloaked in protocol. When the meeting ended, Marcus Jackson's suspension was unanimous. Alone in a Pentagon hallway, staring at portraits of Air Force legends, Rebecca confronted a truth more painful than any reprimand. Her career had been shaped by a system that protected itself at the cost of its best people. And now, she had to choose complicity or courage. The visit she found Marcus later that evening, in his small apartment, packing his things after being escorted off Edwards Air Force Base under armed guard. He looked up as she stepped through the doorway. "Rebecca," he said evenly, "I suppose you've heard." "I've heard the lies," she replied, "and I've seen how far they're willing to go to destroy someone who challenges their comfort." "This isn't your fight," he said gently. "Standing with me will only cost you." She stepped further in, her decision crystallizing in that moment. "My career means nothing if I can't use it to protect people like you from injustice. Tomorrow morning, I'm submitting my resignation and requesting a full Inspector General investigation into this coordinated character assassination." Marcus stared at her. "You're serious?" "For the first time in my life," she said, completely. Resignation. Rebecca's resignation letter was direct, uncompromising, and final. Effective immediately. "I resign my commission as a colonel in the United States Air Force. I can no longer serve an institution that protects power over truth and destroys exceptional officers to shield prejudice and personal agendas. By 0600, it was submitted a formal request for an IG investigation. The fallout was immediate. General Henderson called within minutes. "Colonel Morrison, have you lost your mind? You're throwing away 20 years of service for someone under investigation." "I'm protecting those 20 years, she said firmly, "by refusing to be complicit in destroying an innocent man." Then came her father. 4 generations of military tradition in his voice. "Rebecca, Think this through. His situation isn't worth the ruin of your career. But it wasn't about situations. It was about a moral line. One she could no longer cross. The breaking point by noon. Former colleagues, family friends, and Pentagon officials were calling nonstop trying to pull her back. Then David Patterson arrived at her hotel. Uniform pressed. Engagement ring ready. No, you're under stress, he began. But I want you to know, I'm willing to stand by you. We can get through this. She looked at him carefully. David, this isn't an episode. This is who I am now. You're choosing unemployment and exile over a man with compromised security. I'm choosing to stand beside someone whose character exceeds everyone else in our circle. His voice dropped. Are you in love with him? Rebecca hesitated for the first time, truly understanding her answer. Maybe I am. Maybe I've fallen for someone who reminds me who I want to be. David walked out, taking with him the last thread of her old life, a new path. That afternoon, she found Marcus at the Veterans Center, helping disabled service members file claims with quiet patience. He looked up, surprised. What are you doing here? I resigned this morning, and requested a full investigation into the false accusations against you. I won't serve an institution that sacrifices its best people. They stepped outside, sitting on a bench beneath the flag. I want to build something new, she told him. An advocacy organization that serves justice, not connections. One that lifts the invisible, the overlooked. Marcus looked skeptical. That's a beautiful dream, Rebecca. But starting over is hard, especially without the system behind you. I have savings, contacts, and most of all I have you, if you'll do this with me. He studied her. You're asking me to build an organization and something more personal with the person who once tried to erase my contributions. I'm asking you to help me become the person I should have been. To be my partner in mission and in life. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, reaching for her hand. Rebecca Morrison, you've surprised me at every turn since that landing. I suppose I'm willing to be surprised again. The call that changed everything, the call came unexpectedly and it changed everything, Marcus answered, unaware his life was about to pivot once again. Captain Jackson, the voice on the other end began it, was General Rodriguez, the newly appointed Chief of Personnel. The Inspector General's investigation has concluded. It confirmed a coordinated conspiracy against you. Court-martial proceedings have been initiated against both Lieutenant Colonel Patterson and Colonel Williams. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. But there's more, Rodriguez continued. The investigation also uncovered systemic discrimination within Air Force promotion practices. As a result, the Secretary of the Air Force has ordered your immediate reinstatement with a promotion to Major, effective today. In addition, you're being offered command of a new experimental test squadron at Edwards. Marcus was stunned. But the most profound news came nearly a year later. A letter from Air Force headquarters arrived. He'd been selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel and assigned command of the 412th Test Wing, making him the youngest African-American wing commander in the history of the U.S. Air Force. At the promotion ceremony, General Matthews addressed the assembled brass and media. Colonel Jackson, he said, your case has forever altered how the Air Force identifies and advances its most capable leaders. Your resilience, integrity, and leadership have made us better. You've reminded us that courage is not only found in combat, but also in character. Rebecca watched from the audience, pride swelling in her chest. The man she'd once dismissed now stood at the pinnacle of the institution that had tried to bury him. And he had earned it not just with skill, but with unwavering dignity. The op-ed Washington Post editorial board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10, but Rebecca arrived 3 hours early. Before her lay a 7-page op-ed, meticulously written and titled, Why I Left the Air Force to Fight Institutional Racism. It was more than an article. It was a severance final, and public from the institution that had once defined her. Michael Thompson, a decorated journalist and editorial director, reviewed the draft with a skeptical eye. "Ms. Morrison," he said carefully, "this is a powerful piece. But you should know. We've already received calls from Pentagon officials urging us to reconsider publication." Rebecca remained calm. "Concerns about what, exactly?" "They're suggesting the article contains classified information and constitutes personal attacks on senior leadership. The Air Force has brought in legal advisors to assess the risks." She expected this. Her article laid bare the institutional racism embedded in Air Force promotion systems, backed by examples from IG reports, court-martial records, and personnel data. She detailed how qualified minority officers were systemically sidelined, while mediocrity flourished under the shield of nepotism and institutional bias. "Mr. Thompson," she said evenly, "every word in that piece is backed by documented findings. If the truth is inconvenient, that's precisely why it must be published." The meeting stretched 5 hours. Lawyers dissected every paragraph. Editors challenged every claim. Rebecca stood her ground, providing report, excerpts, transcripts, and data that painted an unmistakable picture. By noon, the Post agreed to publish with legal precautions in place. The fallout before Rebecca even reached her car. The calls began. Pentagon officials demanded retractions. Military Public Affairs launched a damage control campaign. Legal threats came in waves. Her mother's voice cracked through the phone line that afternoon. "Rebecca, darling, what have you done? The entire military community is in an uproar. You must release a clarifying statement." "No, Mother," she said quietly. "I was complicit in a system that wastes talent and buries truth. I'm done pretending that's acceptable." The article dropped Friday morning and set off an earthquake in Washington. Her inbox filled with hate mail from former colleagues, icy messages from Air Force Academy classmates, and legal threats from military attorneys. But amid the storm, other voices rose. Young officers, Black, Latino, Asian, Native, and female, emailed to say, "Thank you. You said what we couldn't. You made space for us." Veteran advocacy organizations reached out, inviting her to speak on reforming military culture. Congressional aides called, requesting testimony for upcoming military justice hearings. But the most meaningful call came from Marcus. "Rebecca," he said, voice steady, "I just read your piece. You realize what this means, don't you?" She did. "There's no going back," he said. "I know," she replied, "and I don't want to." "The price and the reward back to your old life after this?" Marcus asked. Rebecca smiled, surprised by how liberating the next words felt. "I think that's exactly the point," she replied. The fallout had been swift and comprehensive. Military social invitations vanished. Memberships in prestigious veterans organizations were revoked. Professional relationships that had lasted decades evaporated almost overnight. Rebecca was effectively exiled from the privileged world that had shaped her identity since childhood. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of that social collapse, something unexpected happened. She discovered who she really was, once stripped of inherited status and external validation. Working alongside Marcus to build their veteran advocacy organization, she found herself more energized and purposeful than she'd ever felt in uniform. Their first major case involved a group of minority veterans pursuing discrimination claims against the Department of Veterans Affairs. Their second was a coalition of women veterans demanding justice for sexual assault cover-ups within the military justice system. Their third was a class action lawsuit challenging systemic bias in military court proceedings. "We're not just building an organization," Rebecca told a reporter covering their work. "We're proving that military excellence doesn't require exclusion, that justice emerges from inclusion, that doing the right thing is the strategic thing." standing in their modest office walls, lined with thank you letters from veterans they'd helped. Photos of families reunited through their efforts. Rebecca felt something she'd never experienced in all her years of service: the profound satisfaction of using her military training not to protect power, but to expand justice. Her public stand had cost her dearly: social status, family approval, financial security. But it had given her something far more meaningful: the chance to become a veteran, whose success lifted others, instead of reinforcing their exclusion, whose work reflected her deepest values, whose love story defied every assumption about who deserved respect and recognition. And most of all, it earned her something no rank or ribbon ever had: Marcus's trust, respect, and growing affection. Gifts far more valuable than the privilege she'd walked away from to earn them. The impact the article she had written continued to generate controversy, but also opened doors. It attracted the attention of congressional reformers, military justice advocates, and progressive veteran leaders, people who had long waited for someone with insider credibility to speak hard truths about institutional discrimination in the armed forces. Within months, Rebecca was testifying before Congress about reforming military justice. She was consulting with the Pentagon on bias in promotion systems. She was leading a national movement to dismantle the invisible barriers, keeping qualified minority officers from advancing to senior leadership. 3 years later, 3 years after leaving the Air Force, Rebecca stood before a mirror in the quiet home she now shared with Marcus, preparing for the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony. Their organization was being recognized for extraordinary service to military families and veterans. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the one who once measured her worth by rank and tradition. Her dress blues were long gone, replaced by a simple business suit bought with money she earned, serving those who couldn't afford legal representation. Her medals and decorations had been donated to a veterans museum, but her eyes held something far more valuable now: clarity, resolve, and a hard-won understanding that inherited privilege could never offer. Marcus appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie with the same quiet dignity that had first caught her attention the day of that emergency landing. 3 years of shared advocacy, honest partnership, and mutual respect had created a foundation deeper than anything built from professional ambition or romantic impulse. "You ready for this?" he asked, gently straightening her collar. Rebecca smiled. "I've been ready for this since the day I realized everything I thought I knew about military service was wrong." They drove to Washington together, past the Pentagon, where she once worked, past Arlington National Cemetery, where their advocacy had helped hundreds of veterans receive long-denied burial honors, toward the White House, where the president would soon recognize their work. The ceremony, the East Room, was adorned with flags representing every branch of the armed forces. Rebecca and Marcus watched from their seats as fellow honorees were recognized for their work in civil rights, veteran health care, and military family support. Then their names were called. Applause erupted as they rose, walking forward side by side, not just to receive an award, but to represent a larger truth: that justice-minded service could succeed while challenging injustice, that values didn't have to be sacrificed for victory, that principled defiance could become national leadership. Rebecca stepped up to the podium. 3 years ago, she began, I believed that military excellence meant excluding others to protect institutional comfort. I thought leadership required maintaining rigid hierarchies, even if it kept exceptional people from the opportunities they deserved. She looked out across the room at Pentagon officials who still struggled to understand her decisions, at family members who'd come to support her work, and at fellow advocates who had helped her stay the course. I was wrong about everything that mattered, she said. Our organization succeeds because we recognize excellence wherever it exists, because we serve the veterans most often ignored by traditional systems, and because we believe that true service isn't about protecting power, it's about earning trust. She paused, then turned slightly to look at Marcus. And I've learned that when you stand beside someone who embodies integrity, you don't just survive the fallout, you build something better from it. After the ceremony concluded, but its reverberations lingered in the quiet moments that followed. Rebecca and Marcus joined a reception in the Rose Garden, where military families approached them to share stories of lives changed through their advocacy. Parents spoke of veterans finally receiving benefits. Spouses recalled sleepless nights eased by support networks Rebecca and Marcus had built. Young officers, once overlooked, now served with pride in roles once out of reach. As the sun dipped behind the White House, a familiar figure approached General Jackson, now a 4-star, and the Air Force's Vice Chief of Staff. "Rebecca," he said, emotion thick in his voice, "I want to thank you for seeing my worth when others couldn't." Rebecca reached for his hand. "Marcus, your worth was always there. I just had to learn how to recognize it." They stood quietly for a moment, surrounded by the soft sounds of the celebration, veterans laughing, children playing, dignitaries clinking glasses. Later, as the evening wind cooled the Rose Garden, Rebecca stepped onto the White House balcony with Marcus beside her. Below, the lights of Washington shimmered like stars scattered across the land they had both served once in uniform. Now, in truth, Marcus offered her a glass of champagne. "Regrets?" he asked, gently. Rebecca paused. She considered the question. Seriously, her bank account was smaller. Her once-packed social calendar had become quiet. Some family relationships remained strained. Former colleagues still whispered about betrayal, about misguided activism. David Patterson had married someone more suitable, and a few Air Force friends still believed this was just a phase that the old Rebecca would return. She sipped. Slowly, "I regret," she said finally, "that it took me 34 years to understand what you knew from childhood. I regret the cruelty I inflicted on you, on others. I regret the opportunities I wasted to use my privilege to help instead of protect." Marcus smiled. "That's not what I meant." Rebecca looked up, reading the question behind the words. "No regrets about choosing this life over the old one. No. Regrets about choosing truth over comfort, love over expectation, justice over inherited position." She shook her head, slowly. "No, none of that." 2 years later, they were married. The ceremony took place at Arlington National Cemetery, not in mourning, but in testimony to the sacredness of service and sacrifice. The guests were not society elites, but veterans they'd fought for, military families who had become friends, advocacy colleagues who had watched their partnership evolve from collaboration to commitment. They walked down an aisle formed by honor guards from every service branch. The moment was solemn, joyful. Hard-1. Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had lost a prestigious military career. She had relinquished inherited expectations. She had forfeited social approval that once felt vital to her identity. But in return, she had gained something far more meaningful, the chance to become a veteran whose life reflected her values, a love that transcended the artificial boundaries she once helped enforce. A vocation rooted not in prestige, but in purpose, one that expanded justice for those long denied it. The woman who once grounded a black pilot for being different had come to understand that her dismissal reflected her own inadequacy, not his unworthiness. She had learned that true transformation doesn't happen when we force others to meet our expectations, but when we evolve to become people worthy of their respect. In choosing Marcus, she hadn't just chosen a man. She had chosen a way of serving, one that saw extraordinary potential in overlooked places, one that valued character over connections, substance over status, one that proved human worth could not be measured by family pedigree, academy rankings, or social position. Their love story wasn't about a reformed elitist and a forgiving colleague. It was about two people brave enough to see past the conditioning of their upbringing and into each other's souls. It was about the courage to build something across lines of race, rank, and history, something honest, something deeply human. The first dance as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by a community that had witnessed every stage of their transformation. Rebecca leaned in close and whispered in Marcus's ear, "Thank you for waiting patiently while I learned to see your excellence, and for believing I could become someone worthy of your love." Marcus pulled back slightly, eyes meeting hers, his smile bright enough to light the entire reception. "Rebecca," he said, voice low and steady, "we taught each other. You gave me hope that even the most privileged hearts can choose justice over comfort. And I gave you the space to discover who you really are once everything that doesn't matter is stripped away." The music swelled. They moved together in perfect step, two people who had been tested by history, reshaped by truth, and reunited by purpose. Their love story was complete, but their life together was just beginning, because they had learned this. The most beautiful transformations in life don't happen when we change others to fit our world. They happen when we change ourselves to be worthy of theirs.